Hello, I'm Stephen Cole, and you're at The Listening Post. This week, citizen journalists and the world's biggest news stories. How amateur reporters are playing a growing role in reporting events around the world. The citizen journalist's best friend? The World Wide Web. We click around to see how much of an impact citizen journalism websites are making. 4 stories where the mainstream media would have been sunk were it not for amateur pictures. And a viral video for summer. 2 guys, a pair of sunglasses, and a bag of editing tricks. Welcome back. This week, we've put together a special broadcast focusing on what is possibly one of the most debated news trends and one of the most well-known: citizen journalism. Critics call it journalism on the cheap, unskilled hacks putting out stories that are heavy on opinion and light on fact. According to those championing amateur reporters, it's a way to keep mainstream media honest, and in some cases, it's just about the only way to get a story out. But while the debate over the relevance and ethics of citizen journalism goes on, amateur reporters are playing a growing role in covering some of the world's biggest news stories, from Iraq to Myanmar to the United States. At times, they even manage to shape the news itself. The Listening Post's Meenakshi Ravi on how amateur journalists are shaping the coverage and sometimes even shaping the news.
What could a once full-time housewife, a former mountain ranger, and a Burmese academic have in common? Well, between the 3 of them, they've covered some of the world's biggest recent news stories, and they've all done it from outside the mainstream media.
There are still times and there are still places when conventional media cannot get in there, cannot get the news out. And bloggers and citizen journalists are responding to that quite deliberately.
For these new age journalists, news reporting is 1 part passion and 1 part filling a void left by the mainstream media. Dar Jamail found himself pulled towards Iraq in 2003, half a world away from his job as a mountain ranger in Alaska.
What prompted me to go to Iraq was really the disparity in the coverage, comparing U.S. mainstream media coverage of the invasion and beginning months of the occupation to what I was reading in overseas publications. It was almost like watching a different story.
Collateral damage, that is, any civilian casualties.
And so I decided I wanted to go see what was happening myself and write about it.
With only scanty freelancing experience and just about 3 months' worth of savings, Dar headed into Iraq and launched into his journey as an independent journalist.
The first trip was completely self-funded, shared hotel rooms with friends, shared interpreters, shared costs, eat 2 meals a day instead of 3, this kind of thing. But it worked in that I was able to then come home and give talks about what I saw in Iraq and raise money that way to fund a return trip.
But for journalists working outside of the mainstream, money is just the first of many obstacles to clear.
The next main challenge that I faced was finding an outlet that would actually run my information. For example, about 5 months before the Abu Ghraib scandal broke, I had already come across several instances of Iraqis being tortured in U.S. detention facilities. And I tried to literally feed this information to mainstream news outlets back home, and no one would even respond to the emails. I was sending stories and photos of people who had been tortured, and no one would even touch them. Once I did finally find outlets like Interpress Service in Europe and some other European outlets, then I was able to just settle in and just do my job.
For Dar, the eventual opportunities provided by liberal mainstream outlets gave his work a platform. For Burmese academic and blogger Maung Zarni, his platform was the internet.
It was really the information technology that enabled us to relay the narratives that describe the tremendously depressing Burmese situation.
The online Burmese community played a crucial role in getting the word out about the country's turmoil, both during the pro-democracy demonstrations in late 2007 and during the cyclone that hit in May 2008. Bloggers like Zarni were in touch with people inside the country and helped to get their voices heard.
We're getting blow-by-blow accounts of how the Burmese hunters troops were hunting down the monks, or where the worst hit areas are within the Burmese Delta. People were able to identify their own needs as opposed to having to rely on say established media, which would inevitably filter their voices or their views. And so in this sense, the internet and blogging and other various internet-based activities are extremely helpful to us.
In the barren news media space of Burma, bloggers played the essential role of gathering and distributing information. Halfway across the world, citizen journalists tracking the media-saturated American election beat have a less clear-cut role. In fact, once full-time housewife Mayhill Fowler, who's now a columnist with online citizen journalism initiative Off the Bus, was incredibly skeptical about what she could offer in a field so overpopulated with mainstream journalists.
I was actually rather dubious about my editors at Off the Bus telling me, oh, there's new media that's going to advance what old media is doing in the United States, and it's going to do a better job. And I was very suspicious of that because I love the New York Times, I love the Wall Street Journal.
But it was none of those big publications that eventually broke the story that Mayhill did.
At a fundraiser in San Francisco last week, Obama suggested that many working-class voters are, quote, bitter about economic decline, and out of frustration they turn to guns, religion, and anti-immigrant sentiment.
On April 6 this year, Mayhill attended an Obama fundraiser. The event had been closed to the mainstream media, and Mayhill was allowed access on the basis of her status as an Obama supporter. However, comments made by Obama about white working-class voters set off alarm bells in Mayhill's head. She decided the comments were too powerful to ignore and included them in an article that she wrote for Off the Bus.
It shaped the campaign narrative for election 2008, but I certainly never went into the event thinking that I would get such a story. But when I heard Senator Obama make these remarks about small town and rural Americans, I gave it a lot of thought before putting the story out there, and I had a long talk with my editor at Off the Bus, but I decided in the end it was too important a story to keep to myself.
These comments are causing quite a firestorm. Right.
The article sparked off a media storm, and Mayhill was at the center of it all.
The criticism mostly came from supporters of Barack Obama, who thought that I had ruined his chances of getting the Democratic nomination, much less the presidency.
But some bad press aside, Mayhill's story brought about significant change to the Obama campaign's interaction with the media. Obama fundraising events will now be open to all, a sign that politicians are learning to deal with the age of citizen journalism and digital media.
The wonderful thing about citizen journalism is the fact that the public are able to speak for themselves. They can participate in media, they can create their own media. But of course, if you've got people who aren't professionals, then you're going to get a different kind of media. I don't see that as a problem. It's a challenge because it's different, but different can be good.
With so much debate about just what citizen journalism is and what its real benefits are, we asked our Global Village voices this week to give us their definitions of citizen journalism.
The original thesis was in fact one of a radicalization and incredible democratization of the traditional media or the commonly understood journalistic practices. But what has in fact happened is that citizen journalism has not delivered on its promise. If you look at all the major events around the world, the best coverage is still coming from the traditional media because they have greater access to resources, they're tapped into networks for early warning around particular breaking news events, and the traditional media is really geared towards this kind of journalism.
One of these citizen journalist events that's had the most impact was perhaps the 7/7 bombings in London, where over 3,000 emails and 300 pictures were picked up in the first few hours after the event, which obviously informed the news media. Now, that's a good thing in terms of immediacy, but it's a bad thing in terms of a lack of editorial filter. There's no process that goes through before the news hits the media, and I think journalists can still do their job. I think there is still a place for good journalism, but citizen journalism has its place too.
Our Global Village Voice platform is your chance to tell us what you think about the media. If you have a webcam, cell phone camera, or even digital camera, email us at listeningpost@aljazeera.net. We'll find a way to get your voice on the air. One-click technology means that nearly everyone with a camera or mobile phone is a potential roving photojournalist or cameraman. If it were not for amateur snappers, the world would simply not have visual images for some of the world's biggest news events. Heba Ayoub now with 4 big news stories that journalists wish they had caught on film.
The world's media had their lenses trained on London on the 6th of July 2005. When the city was awarded the 2012 Olympic Games.
London, we've done it!
Less than 24 hours later, quite a different story broke, one the traditional media couldn't get to. 3 bombs were set off deep underground on the London Tube. A 4th was detonated shortly after on a bus. The explosions killed 52 people. A major coordinated terrorist attack had long been predicted in the British capital. When it happened, it was ordinary Londoners who provided the iconic images that filled the global news. The execution of Saddam Hussein is perhaps the most famous secret film of recent years. The former Iraqi dictator's trial was a long and public affair. The announcement of the verdict was a live TV event. However, the execution itself was completely off limits to the media. But in the days of the mobile phone camera, such restrictions have become virtually impossible to enforce. The execution was filmed secretly, and the cell phone video was soon plastered all over the internet and mainstream media. The crucial difference between the secret film and the official Iraqi footage was audio. With sound, it was evident that the former Iraqi president was taunted by his executioners before his death. The clip caused outrage over the way in which the execution was handled by the Iraqi government. Holidaymakers often return from their trips with happy, colourful home videos. For many who were on the beaches of Thailand and neighbouring countries on December 26, 2004, however, the videos and pictures they took were of the disastrous Asian tsunami. There had been no warnings of the approaching tsunami, and when the massive waves struck, it was only locals and tourists who had their cameras rolling. Many didn't live to tell the tale, but their pictures bear terrifying witness. Politicians caught off camera making ill-considered remarks is nothing new. What's new is that now there isn't really any such thing as off-camera. The 2008 presidential campaign has become the longest and most expensive of all time. And perhaps none of the off-the-cuff or supposedly private remarks may be more expensive or explosive than this joke John McCain thought he was sharing with a private audience in April of 2007.
That old Beach Boys song, Bomberan. Bom, 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 bom. Anyway.
McCain tried to shrug it off, but his take on the Beach Boys' catchy classic became an instant viral hit.
Bomberan, bom, bom, bom.
And is unlikely to fall off voters' radars anytime soon.
Bomberan.
After the break, we'll be taking a look at citizen journalism on the web, how independent news websites measure up to the competition.